All right, Marissa Shaw, brain dissection. All right, to start out is the dura mater. The dura mater is the outermost coating along the brain, all over the brain. It's the outermost meningeal layer. The lateral fissure. The lateral fissure is this area right here. It's going to separate the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobes. That is our lateral fissure. Next, the longitudinal fissure. It's going to track along the middle of the brain here. It separates the brain into the left and right hemispheres. It's a longitudinal fissure. Gyrus, moving a little closer, it's going to be the ridges along the brain. And the sulcus, that's going to be the little indentions between the gyri all over the cerebrum. The precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus is going to be this area right here. That is our primary motor cortex. Just behind the precentral gyrus is the central sulcus. The central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. And just behind the central sulcus is the postcentral gyrus. That is our primary sensory cortex. All right, parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is this area right here, just behind the postcentral gyrus. It's the parietal lobe. The temporal lobe is going to be on the side here. That's the temporal lobe. And the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is posterior. The occipital lobe is this area right here, right in front of our cerebellum. That's the occipital lobe. And then this entire structure here is the cerebellum. All right, we're going to flip it over for the inferior view. All right, moving into the inferior view of the brain, we have the olfactory nerve here. That's the olfactory nerve. That's the olfactory bulb. And this is the olfactory tract. The optic nerve is this nerve here tracking out. This is the optic chiasma. Optic chiasma and the optic nerve. The oculomotor nerve is the structure right here is the oculomotor nerve. The trochlear nerve is, see if we can move in to see it. That is the trochlear nerve. The trigeminal nerve is in this area right in here. Trigeminal nerve. Abducens. The abducens is right in here. The facial nerve is in the area right here. The vestibulocochlear nerve, this other side, and it's in this area right here. The glossopharyngeal nerve is going to be in this section here. The vagus nerve is a little further down, and it tracks through here. The accessory nerve is right in here. And the hypoglossal nerve is in this area as well. The brainstem, entire section right here is the brainstem, and the three structures that make up the brainstem. This is our midbrain, this is our pons, and this is our medulla oblongata. This is the mid-sagittal view. Cut the brain right down the longitudinal fissure. So to start off, we have the corpus callosum here. Corpus callosum. The thalamus It's right here. The third ventricle is right in here. And the fourth ventricle is right down in here, and that's our cerebral aqueduct that is connecting the two. So the third ventricle, it sends its cerebrospinal fluid through that cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle. This is our brain stem here. It's going to be our midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, tracking all the way down. And that's our cerebellum. That structure right there, that big structure. All right, and just to identify the functions of all the structures, starting over with the superior outer view, the dura mater is the outermost meningeal layer. Both the brain and the spinal cord have dura mater. The lateral fissure separates the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobes. The gyrus, those are the folds that are on the cerebral cortex. The sulcus, those are the indentions between all of the gyri that cover the cortex. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, and that is for conscious thought. Frontal lobe, it's part of the cerebrum. The frontal lobe is for voluntary movement and things of that nature. The central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. The precentral gyrus is the primary motor cortex. It sits right and things of that nature. The central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. The precentral gyrus is the primary motor cortex. It sits right in front of the central sulcus. The post-central gyrus sits right behind the central sulcus, and that is our primary sensory cortex. The parietal lobe, that is the parietal lobe receives and kind of, how do you say this? Interprets all sensory information that is not visual, auditory, or smell. The temporal lobe, that's big with memory and abstract thought. The occipital lobe, it receives and interprets visual information. And the cerebellum is for locomotion, posture, and balance. Moving on to the cranial nerves, the olfactory nerve is for smell. The optic nerve transmits impulses to the brain from the eye. The oculomotor nerve services the eyeball and the eyelid so they can move. The trochlear nerve also is involved with eye motor movement. The trigeminal nerve is for receive sensory information involving the face and the mouth. The abducens nerve controls the lateral rectus muscle of the eye. The facial nerve is for motor control of facial expression. The vestibulocochlear nerve is for hearing and balance. The glossopharyngeal nerve receives sensory information from the tongue. The vagus nerve, it does many things, but one example is stomach acid production. The accessory nerve supplies the sternocleidomastoid muscle.